Hello, hello. I'm just having my second attempt at recording this video. Small children decide to get up earlier and earlier every day, apparently. I don't want to like rush through life or anything, but I wonder what time they'll get up when they're teenagers. You never know. Anyway, um, so yeah, the purpose, if that hasn't got you switching off already, the purpose of the video is I want to talk about a very simple model for how to respond to the things that happen around you. So I've talked before about various aspects of this. So just being a bit more self-aware, about trying to respond rather than reacting, being aware when that happens and figure out little tricks and mechanisms that you can put in place to help with that, because it's a tricky one because it can be quite automatic and by its very nature you can essentially end up reacting before you even really realise that it's happened. I always rationalise this with, if you ever watch old videos of, as laughing at the fact I'm referring to it as old, considering that I remember this very vividly from not that long ago. If you watch like the 100-meter sprint in old athletics competitions where they used to use a proper starting gun. I don't think they use a proper starting gun anymore. But if you stood at the finish line of the 100 meters and looked at the person firing the starting pistol, you would see the puff of smoke from the gun before you heard the noise, and that's to do with the difference between the speed of light and the speed of sound. And it's a bit like that with responding and reacting. Often your reaction has happened before you're even consciously aware of it. And that's kind of the nature of these things. So that is why it takes a little bit of practice and self-awareness and reflection to be able to work on these kinds of things. So let's talk about that. So where this comes from really is because if you've been following any of my stuff for over the last couple of years, you will know that I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy and the Stoic virtues, and particularly the work of Ryan Holiday at the Daily Stoic. So I try and start my day every day when I'm writing in my journal. I listen to a little bit of Daily Stoic, and that sets me up for the day pretty much. So I've been meaning for a while to look at Ryan Holiday's books. So he's written quite a lot of books, not all about Stoic philosophy, but certainly his most recent ones have been based on the Stoic virtues. So I've started working my way through his books, and I'm afraid I can't remember which one it was I started with. I'm currently listening to an audiobook version, Ego is the Enemy, and I can't for the life of me think which one it was I started with now, which is really bad. So in the unlikely event that Ryan Holiday's watching, I apologise, but at least I'm buying and reading you and listening to your books, so hopefully that helps. So he was talking about, essentially about this whole thing about how do we change how we respond to things that happen around us, and there are things within our power to change that. If you ever feel like you're completely powerless, then there's a good chance that you're probably not looking at the situation closely enough, to figure out what you need to accept and what is actually within your power to change. And I'm aware I'm probably oversimplifying when I say that. There's lots of really difficult situations that people find themselves in, and that might seem like a gross oversimplification, but there is generally, if you look hard enough at things about situations that you can control. So he talks about observe, perceive, and act as a model, and this is essentially also, it's a model, but it's also the stages that you will naturally go through when something happens and you're responding or you're reacting to it in some way. Something happens, you're expecting it, you're not expecting it. In order for you to be aware that that has happened, you will have to observe that in some way. Okay, so that happens fairly automatically. Perceive is where you kind of you're making sense of what's happened. You're applying it to your own context. You are figuring out what these events mean for you in some way. So that's the perception bit. and that's probably that's the bit where you can exercise a lot of control, which we'll come back to. And then act is the next step. So you decide then what you're going to do in response to that. So there's a chain of events of some kind. So you observe it, you make sense of it, then you take some kind of action. Okay, so we can break this down a little bit further. So I don't think that there is an awful lot that you can do to change your observation of the events that happen around you. I think that the best that you can do is to work to have your mindset in as even a place as possible, so that you're observing the events around you without bias. And bias is a bigger issue than we think it is. It never ceases to amaze me. Take sport for example. Take all the video ref stuff that happens around. Anything football, rugby related. We've got video images of something happening, and if you show that video to 100 people, you will still get people who differ in their responses to it, which is quite remarkable, really. And that will, you could probably break that down just based on people's background experiences, what team they support. So bias is a big issue with these things. So aim to have your mindset in a kind of fairly even keel most of the time, and that will help to eliminate some of that bias that can creep in. Perception is quite a big thing. So then it's how we then begin to respond to the things that happen around us. So there will be that kind of temptation to just react in the moment as a reflex, and sometimes that's totally appropriate. So if you've got a car's gone out of control and it's heading towards you, you just need to react and get out of there. That's your survival reflexes. These are the parts of your primitive brain that go back to when we had to be more worried about saber-toothed tigers and life threats. It's a survival thing. So sometimes that will be appropriate, but most of the time it's not about survival. It's about deciding the next best thing to do in that particular circumstance. Okay, so let's just we'll think a little bit less about survival. We'll anticipate that we're going to get a wave of something. We need to do something urgent, but then we need to try and give ourselves a beat, give ourselves a breath, to allow that kind of tidal wave of emotional reaction to subside a little bit, so that we can then use a bit more of our rational thought to decide what to do next. The next thing about perception is then actually deciding, what bits of this can I actually control? Am I trying to control things that are uncontrollable? Am I wasting energy? Am I worrying excessively about things that I have no control over? So it's then figuring out, what can I control, what can I not? Letting go of the things that you can't control, because that's a waste of time and energy, and focusing your time and energy on the things that you can control. Okay, so there's a degree of acceptance there as well, and that's not about being passive. That's about figuring out where to apply the energy that you don't have very much of. And then we come to the final bit, which is act. So, all the thinking in the world is great, but unless you're actually planning to take any action on it, it's utterly useless, essentially. Okay. So taking action is essential as part of this model. And it's not just about doing something, it's about doing the right something as well. And you don't need to be paralyzed by fear that, well, what if I do this and it's the wrong thing? So just figure out the best possible thing to do in that particular scenario and start doing that, but make sure that you're open to challenge yourself on that as more information becomes available. Okay, so it's not black and white. It's not don't do anything just in case it's the wrong thing. It's not just react and do something because something's better than nothing. It's about taking the right action. Okay, and again, that takes self-awareness and practice to be able to get that. And also, you just need to be willing to change what you're doing as well. Recognizing that what you start off doing might not be the right thing. Okay, so that's the observe, perceive, act model of how we can respond to things. And I always think we need to get that proportion right of responding versus reacting. Let me know what you think of that, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next one.